Welcome to today's video, right? For those watching across the earth or underground or perhaps beyond this earth, wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever your motivation, welcome to today's edition of Outside the Box TV. It is October 2nd in the year 2018. I'm Alex Ansary, coming to you from somewhere out there in southern Colorado. We're going to be talking about the sun, and I'm going to be sharing some updated scientific facts from a recent presentation, a slideshow, and more, presented by Tamitha Stove, I believe, and she is a solar physicist, has her own YouTube channel. I'm going to add her to the list of interesting channels on the front page of my channels. There's a couple male up there, a couple female. A couple introductions before we get started. First of all, this is the second time that I'm recording this. The last time I recorded this, which was yesterday, we went on over an hour and there were some major technical difficulties, so I'm re-recording this for you. Second, it's good news that the monetization is back, but it's going to take a long time just to make anything with the numbers that I have. 100% of what I'm making right now is coming from viewers like you. And right now it's just a few, and we also have the group over at Patreon, and we have a new person that signed up at outsidethebox.vhx.tv. So I appreciate your support, and this content on this channel is diverse. So there is some content that relates to self-help, although I'll have you know that the mental health commentary that I gave was all demonetized. And that validates the opinion that I gave to begin with, that the little guy, whether it be online or somewhere else, metaphorically and literally, they don't want to hear our opinions on the mental health crisis in America. But I'm going to keep talking about that and some of the other issues that are going on, geopolitical updates. We won't, of course, just be talking about what is happening with other people in the alternative media and this world of censorship. You know, there is the light side and the dark side of reality. And on the topic of the light side, the sun is one of those things that's been something that has connected me even deeper with my own spirituality. In fact, it was my own spiritual discoveries early on when I was involved in creating media. So during that period and looking for the truth behind these cycles, and I experienced cycles within my own life. And later I came upon understanding about the solar cycles and influence not only over our life, but other trends. So here's what's planned for today's presentation. I hope I can do this under an hour. I'm going to go through a brief introduction from the ebook that I wrote in 2013 in Costilla County, but didn't publish until 2017. There's a lot of things that I thought were missing, and I wanted to be more of a larger sized book before it was published. And last year I decided that it's best to just get the information out now. We're going into a solar minimum, or we are in one, and the next cycle for us is a solar maximum, and that is where my focus primarily is. But we're going to be discussing a little bit more about solar minimum and common terms today when I share some of the notes from Tamitha's lecture. You know, what is a solar maximum, for example? What is a solar minimum for people that don't know, as opposed to a grand solar minimum versus solar minimum? So these different terms define types of cycles. So if you do appreciate programs like this, the time that I put into some of these programs, today's program took about 3 hours to prepare because her presentation was over 2 hours. There was pausing, writing down the notes. In this case, I have them up in a Word document. So please visit Patreon or donate via PayPal at any time of your choosing, at random, if you appreciate the effort that's going into this video series. So let's start with the ebook. Now, if you write down on a piece of paper, for example, solarmaxnews.com, you'll find a link there that says free PDF. And my friend formatted this. I'm thinking of other future revisions and updated information. So this is something that I wrote and put together when I was off the grid in 2013. And I was not on the internet at that time. I want to specify that. So I had a lot of information that I downloaded, and I had the intention of taking this passion in a period and a time-space reality where I was separated from distractions. And for that month of March 2013, before I went to Mark Passio's For Your Mind conference, it was a very productive time. I had a friend at the time that would actually visit, and we would talk about some of these ideas. I had a few jam sessions where I was writing and talking about these ideas and visiting another friend who lived kind of in the area, and he had somewhat of an interest in the subject. So those are some of my early life experiences within this topic, and it's something that also separates a lot of my work from other people on YouTube that stick to primarily conspiratorial topics, or others that talk about the sun that may stick to the part of the cycle of the sun that they're looking at, and perhaps from a doom or gloom perspective, kind of in line with others as we talk more and more about the dollar being devalued. There's more to the conversation about the sun than threats, and even threats to our power grid, but those conversations should be on the table. But I think that we should look at a number of different things. What I wrote then was that the cycles of the sun are greatly impacting the reality that surrounds us, as well as our biology and state of mind throughout time and civilization. Unfortunately, the area of research of how the sun impacts the earth, climate, and human behavior still remains widely unknown. However, today there's a vast amount of historical data available which details the dramatic changes taking place on the planet and all living beings during periods of solar maximums where solar activity reaches its peak. The information is a examination shared here of how the 11 on average year cycles of the sun brings our planet diverse change through increased earthquakes, natural disasters, extreme weather patterns, climate changes, disruptions to power grids, new ideas, directions and movements in society, and changes in human expression and behavior. And that includes personal transformations and spiritual awakenings. We will also examine the correlations of battles between nations launching wars of aggression or the rise of fascist states by examining a 2,500-year timeline of solar maximums throughout history. And this would include examples of what we would identify to be as staged, managed events or manufactured events that are created in order to frighten, anger, or traumatize the population during times in which human societal energy has the greatest potential to evolve its own consciousness. So I'm letting you know right there that I've already speculated years ago that they manufacture particular events to redirect our focus. But I'm not going to let that overshadow the scientific information that I'm about to share with you. And then when we get done going through that, I'm going to read for you something that I compiled back in 2012, information from different people, in this case, Burl Payne, and some information that he compiled on the links between solar cycles and wars breaking out or periods in which there are large conflicts between nations. The importance of looking at scientific information for people that don't even get into our own speculations is that they're going to be focused on the facts. Tamitha's not talking about Planet X. Tamitha's not talking about two suns. Tamitha's not mixing different things together. She's putting on a presentation where she's giving her understanding of the solar cycle, where we are now, and what some of the basic terms mean. She also telegraphs that there's more to this than what she's talking about, and those are in the arena of solar phenomena, as opposed to where she's specializing. So, I kind of get the feeling from, and I'll leave a link down below to the full lecture, that she knows more than what she's put in her presentation. And of course, there's more that I know that I'm putting into this 1 hour video, but I'm trying to focus on the very basics as we are now in solar minimum. So once you already come to an awareness that there are things that are taking place in the world, and that the sun is related, and when we're aware of what's happening, whether we're looking at spaceweather.com, spaceweather.gov, or other solar monitoring websites, we can look at that data of what's going on and also see where it's affecting on what part of the planet, whether it's a CME or a solar flare. We'll talk about the difference in a minute. This knowledge can be very useful. We also do not cater to the flat earth crowd, and that bar is down the street. Okay, so we will now begin with some of the notes. And these are things, of course, that are accepted by the scientific community. So even if she doesn't get into the human behavioral response and she's playing it safe, without a doubt, she and other scientists are aware of it. But it's, just to remind you, it's considered career suicide to get involved in fringe ideas that are not endorsed, by mainline psychiatric institutes and things of that nature where they deal with human psychology. There are studies that they've done, by the way, just so you know as an introduction. We'll talk about some of those studies later on. Studies from like Dr. Robert Becker in 1963, coming up with his own analysis, and the war fever, the mass psychosis of violence, and its connection to geomagnetic storms. It's just a matter of that level of human psychology seems to have dropped off the radar with today's mainstream scientists. Also, a lot of people don't want to lose their funding, so they're not going to go in certain directions that are considered kooky. I was at the Wells Fargo trying to get an overdraft fee taken off my account, dealing with a lot of major economic challenges these days. And she was really nice, and I told her about some of my websites and the YouTube channel and some of the things that I talk about. But I also mentioned check out solarmaxnews.com where my ebook is, where I just read you a segment. And she said that sounded kooky. And see, what's odd about that is you would think that that would be the thing that a mainstream person would see as relevant and not kooky. Scientific, something that links to different reports and paints a larger picture. But even today in 2018, we're still far behind the times. Almost as if people that are looking at things like the sun are being called a witch, and we're back in the medieval period. And what's interesting about the medieval period is connection to a deep solar minimum and a lack of sunspots. And so we will now get started in this particular overview of this update on solar activity from the scientific community, Tamitha Skov. Our topic is how solar activity influences space weather, some of the very basics, not going too deep, but just the basics, and what we can expect to see from various parts of the cycle. And there's going to be some definition of terms, like fast solar wind versus the slower solar wind. What type of circumstances, for example, can allow something like a repeat of that 1859 Carantine event. Also, additional information and terms to understand solar minimum for those who have not really studied the solar cycles at all. So here's some rules of thumb. More solar wind during periods of a quiet sun. But a more active sun, a solar maximum, produces solar flares and CMEs. Okay, so solar wind is the main form of solar energy during a minimum that's coming into our Earth plane of reality. During the maximum, it's coming through the form of the solar flares and the CMEs. Solar flares produce those X flares, radio blackouts, satellite ham, shortwave, satellite transmissions, and GPS. Radio bursts get very high and they drown out other signals. So one of the ways in which this is described in a very simple manner, if you can hear a cricket one moment and you can't hear a cricket another, when a train comes by, it doesn't mean that the cricket stopped. The noise of the cricket was forced out, if you will, by the receiver, by the train. Okay, as it is with the radio bursts and the sun. Also, radio bursts from the sun are affecting the day side of the Earth, not the night side. This is good to keep in mind. Radiation storms very quickly after solar flares. CMEs are mass ejections of plasma. And again, on YouTube, you can take a look at what these ejections look like. Plasma-like materials send the material more slowly out than solar flares after first sending out a shockwave. 2 to 5 day travel time to Earth, from the sun to the Earth. The CMEs are known as what is responsible for the aurora boreleais. They also produce geomagnetic storms. Both of these ejections are associated with an active sun. Again, during a quiet sun, we get more solar wind. What role does the solar variability play? So we are now in solar minimum, right? So the 11-year cycle is also called, according to her, a pseudo-cycle. And it can be as short as 9 years and as long as 14. This previous cycle that we just came out of, number 24, had a longer than average solar minimum, which affected space weather. I'll never forget being snowed in with a former girlfriend at the time that visited me from Australia. and that was late 2008 into 2009, like record snow outside. In fact, the restaurant was closed some days back when I bussed at Ruth Chris Steakhouse. That was my last 6 months there. That also seemed to be a really significant time in my program and the types of guests that were coming on, especially that period from 2007 until 2009. So in my own life, I'm looking at where I was in the solar cycle. Now, studying, and then she showed a chart. I'm working to do this without all of that, and I'm off the grid for those that don't know. So, I don't have the luxury of the power grid to be doing something with a monitor behind me, but I'll do my best. Studying, and you can find these charts online, the 400 years of sunspot observation, it indicates the ice core level during low sunspot levels during the Mandarin minimum. And at that time, sunspots were basically at zero for a period in time. In fact, people at that time thought sunspots were a myth because they lived their entire lives without seeing one. And we have actual instruments to look at sunspots in a more safely way today, and some people don't even know what sunspots are because that's not the main thing on Netflix. Well, they do have things about the sun and the universe, but there isn't a lot. And I've been on Netflix recently, and I've mentioned that. There's a lot of entertaining things and a lot of science fiction things. Not a lot regarding this and real education. The magnetic field of the sun diminishes during solar minimum. Brightness also diminishes. Magnetic fields on the sun during the period of the Mandarin minimum become so weak that they are unable to pop or erupt into a sunspot. So specifically, that period on the Earth, the magnetic field of the sun totally diminished. So for a long period of time, there were no sunspots at all as a result of what was going on magnetically on the sun. And she acknowledges that we don't fully understand the sun's dynamo itself, and theories are still evolving on how the sun operates, and same could be said about the Earth's core. Tree rings are often or commonly used as a means of measuring sunspots along with a lot of other means. So check this out. We had a major event called the Carantine event of 1859, and the Dalton minimum was right before that. Also during that period, right before the Carantine event, people died in the UK during a cold winter. So they had kind of like a mini deep solar minimum and then a big solar event right afterwards. Changes in the sun's behavior in the last cycle has caused scientists to change their projections many times, and the delayed start of the cycle was one of the main reasons for the multiple changes alongside a less active sun than previously predicted. So by 2006, they were looking at 2012, Mayan calendar aside, as the period or year in which they would see the peak. A late cycle meant they pushed it over, and then it was pushed over to 2013 during the time that I was producing the ebook, and then going to Mark Passio's conference that we saw another large solar flare in 2012, a year earlier. There was something synchronistic about the timing of all of that in 2013 rather than 2012. As in, as the sun's more active, we could be thinking and interacting more, in my opinion, with the sun. Thinking about the sun, dreaming about the sun, writing about the sun, being more aware of what's going on energetically on our planet. And that could include many things. Now, going back to her information, it is still very difficult with all the technology and charts and projections for today's scientific community to fully understand the sun's cycles, and thus we're early in our understanding of the sun's function. Large coronal holes, and this is new information for me, during solar minimum is the main cause of geomagnetic storms and spaced weather. So now we're in a solar minimum period. A lot of the geomagnetic storms will be caused by the coronal holes. And you can look up what that looks like on Google Images. Looks like a large black segment, almost like, a piece of the sun was taken out, like it was a slice of pizza or something like that, looking at it from 2D. Maybe a little bit of pie that, you're picking at with like a fork, hoping your grandma doesn't see you. A little bit of apple pie that was baked off the grit somewhere. I do remember actually my grandmother making apple pie. But yeah, picture like a part of that missing and it being uneven. Like, who stuck their hand in that and that being like a sunspot? And here's what's interesting, they rotate. So if you had a solar storm 27 days ago, you're probably due. So like this coronal hole like rotates. And so this is what that means. It makes it easier to predict when there will be a geomagnetic storm caused by the coronal hole due to this rotation. Of course, there's other wild cards that can be thrown in, right? But it's like the main form of solar activity, and it's more of a focused fast stream. You have more of the fast streams during a solar minimum. Now, one of the examples she gave of how this could be used for something good, the idea of predicting it. Sounds like she likes to travel around the world to Iceland, Greenland, places like that to actually look at the aurora borealis. And so having the information about its rotation, places where there's a lot of aurora borealis, where there's a geomagnetic storm, someone can plan their travel arrangements around that. So she talked about that for about 5 minutes. But I talked to you also about the earthquake risks, other things also that can go on when there's geomagnetic storms, about the human behavior response, where if there's already an area with gang violence and it's already off the charts, a geomagnetic storm will just give it a little bit of a boost. And see, my work gets deeper into that in past videos. So how someone takes in this knowledge of when there'll be possibly a geomagnetic storm during solar minimum, that's on a case-by-case basis. So you could be looking at suspicious observers. You could be looking at some of the other channels. They may be focusing specifically on the weather, but there could be information that could be gleaned and interpreted in other ways. I, for one, by the way, stay away from those channels at this point. And the current information that I'm sharing with this person, I've seen a few of her videos. I'm going to be adding her to the recommended interesting channels list over at youtube.com/AlexAnswering. There are other ways of anticipating the energy's arrival and how it will play out on the ground or does here in society. Satellite operators do not like the decline phase of the cycle. Of course, they're working with technology. Things are getting shut down by the storms. So these periodic bursts from the coronal holes causing these storms barely gives the Earth a chance to calm down. So it could barely give us, we can barely have a chance to calm down if we're constantly affected by the storms. Before its radiation belts get hit again. This pumps the radiation belts with energy, and the particles stay very energized, so satellite operators deal with glitches. Our solar system creates its own magnetic shield known as the heliosphere. It is a large bubble which creates its own interstellar wind as it pushes it outward. It is said that Voyager 1 and 2 have crossed on these boundaries of the heliosphere, and that is an example of mankind trying to cross previous known boundaries of space exploration. The edge of the heliosphere is double the length from Pluto. So, within, of course, the framework of how we understand our universe. We really don't go beyond that into fringe theories that I think are promoted anyways by the intelligence communities to keep us confused. Okay. Because I'm already in a field of thought, first of all, of being suspicious of a lot of narratives. But with regards to this, folks, it's not just NASA that observes the sun and observes solar flares. It's not just some observatory in New Mexico that just happens to do this. People don't have to latch on to particular theories because certain things are in the news because they may want to fill a certain narrative. Sometimes that type of thinking works against us. There are fake news websites that I've seen pushing fake geomagnetic storms in the last year. It's not just politics where there's attempt for some reason or another to promote disinformation. So I'm just letting you know that not all sources are legit when dealing with the sun, reality, the universe. There seems to be a lot of deliberate, even if it's not deliberate. The internet still is an anarchy of information. And a lot of people consider my information to be quote-unquote crazy anyways. So as long as I'm going to be put in someone else's box, I might as well speak from my heart and connect the different dots together. So I see a parallel, by the way, between the idea of a human magnetic field or aura. The Earth has a field as well, but so does this solar system. And that is known as the heliosphere. So the edge of the heliosphere is double length from Pluto. So here's a link to Pluto. Here's double that. That's the heliosphere. Now that is called the heliopause, the very edge. What this massive bubble does that most people are unaware of is it protects us from things like cosmic rays. The shield protects our solar system from all kinds of interstellar energies, winds, and particles. It is a force balance. Solar variability influences the shield. During solar minimum, the shield weakens dramatically and is not doing a good job of shielding cosmic rays. In this regard, space weather is more chaotic in other ways, and we can get 20 to 30% or higher of cosmic rays during this period. Now, Maurice Cotterell, another reference to him and his book, Future Sciences. He was on George Dory many times, and it's on that program at least 10 years ago where he made a reference to civilizations collapsing. I haven't read his books. I've just heard his interviews. That was enough to educate me and lead me on the trail to a number of different things. There is a connection between the sun acting in a particular way and civilizations collapsing, and it relates to miscarriages. It relates to less births. And this connection to the cosmic rays, this connection to the radiation affecting the fetuses. So whether this is something that was potentially built in on a larger level in this larger nature machine matrix, or you can call it whatever you want, this biological pool of life that we're in, is this some sort of regulator or something? Is this a regulator of life? The ups and the downs? Are some people at odds with that idea? A lot of things behind that too. So she also puts up a chart and talks about the different types of the cosmic rays. She says they're complicated. Sounds like relationships. They are complicated. It's not just one particle. It's a cosmic ray shower that hits other neutral particles. And when it hits, it's kind of a nuclear reaction. There are 3 different types of showers. One of them is the kind that can make it down to the surface of the earth. And here I am like living literally in between mountains. And she's got a chart of like cosmic rays coming down and hitting mountains. Electromagnetic version that produces gamma rays, proton or particle, can affect us down to the sea level. And they're also anomalous cosmic rays. There's also one major gamma ray predicted for 2022, and we'll be in solar maximum by then. So at least the solar maximum energies will be strengthening our field, unless other factors are going to be weakening our field. But solar maximum and solar minimum have an influence on the strength of our Earth's magnetic field and that of the heliosphere. There are also unmanned technologies that have been used to measure radiation at higher levels. So she's sticking with the framework of what's considered safe. So again, focusing on airline workers, and they're currently reported to be getting 2/3 of the safe radiation levels. There is more discussion about prenatal warning for pregnant women, and this connects to miscarriages and population decline of civilizations in line with the solar cycle, which I just mentioned. Also, there's more attention on this as the solar cycle wanes and the solar maximums aren't as big as they used to, and the solar minimums are getting deeper. So those combination of factors, but things could still change, is what's causing the concern. Of course, we have now more satellites and technology. I'm using satellite internet right now, by the way, to come to you from off the grid. She said, it is hard to know if it's a grand minimum and can still be a Dalton level event. It's possible that it could be a smaller minimum than a grand solar minimum in response to the popular consensus view on what's coming from a lot of people on YouTube. But we are at record levels of galactic cosmic rays and its impact on space exploration, and that includes attempting to get out to Mars, right? So she's not like us with questioning a lot of different things regarding that. So within the official version of reality with regards to that, what we're being told, there could be some truth in this. She says in 2032, there's another opportunity to go to Mars due to its proximity to Earth at this time. However, the projection of cosmic rays by that time complicates their agenda. So it can go deep with that, especially if they've seen my video on Elon Musk and my speculations about some of these off-world programs. I'll just say it right now in brief. What if they're just trying to get off the Earth before their Tower of Babel crumbles from a lot of the solar radiation, or things that could be happening from the deep solar minimum and the things that'll be coming in from the fast solar winds. Seems possible. If they felt they had information that was pointing to something else that would be safe. And maybe going even deeper, now I'm really going outside the box, something else is coddling this civilization. Something else is what has an interest in the population and what it's doing, what it's involved itself with. Again, I'm coming to you from off the grid in one of those tiny homes, so I don't have screen doors. So you'll see more of the flying forms of life in here during this period in which we descend from fall into winter. We definitely are descending into more darkness than before. That's why it's kind of exciting for me to not only spend hours collecting this information, but to have some decent lights and to do this while it's really gray outside. As the darkness comes in, bringing in that light internally by making this the focus of today's conversation, not the darkness on the Google News wire, not the darkness in the world. So I'm going to be trying to break things up on this channel. I really appreciate those of you that do support what it is that I do here. Now, going back to this, we're about halfway through her notes, and I'm going to have to probably be brief with some of the things that I've shared to keep this within a reasonable length. Now, the previous cycle had a record number of cosmic rays, and it's expected to hit a record again. Pacemakers have upsets during flights because of the cosmic rays. Reset issues, serious stuff. There are things about space weather that we don't have a handle on. Society is at risk. Now, she said when you have a number of spotless days, this is about trying to make a projection on what the solar maximum will be based on the behavior of the minimum. This is why charts will help if you're able to find some charts while I'm speaking in another window. When you have a number of spotless days, there's a trend that happens. If the next cycle is going to be low, the maximum that is, the number of sunspot cycles, the number of, that would be spotless days, does not ramp up very fast. But when it ramps up, it reaches a really high number. Examples of this, what we saw in the last cycle, number 24, as well as cycles 10 through 15. If we have a new cycle and the spotlit days ramps up quickly, then it typically plateaus as a low number because the new cycle starts and oftentimes the activity increases. As far as right now, she says we're really ramping up the spotless days. And scientists are beginning to wonder or speculate that we may not have as deep as a minimum as the last cycle. So she's saying that her peers are not convinced that it's, going to, like Art Bell's The Quickening of the movie The Day After Tomorrow, or a lot of people's projections of the grand solar minimum. In my intuitive feeling, by the way, just to say it briefly, no, I don't see what they see. I see what's coming after that. And I've been talking about it for 10 years. And people are mostly, though, looking at the solar minimum and what could be happening with the crops. And doesn't mean that they're wrong. It doesn't mean that it isn't already happening. I'm saying there's more things than that to be concerned with and even fascinated by with regards to the sun and how we as a spirit connect with it and are inspired with it. And so looking at it from just one particular slice, which is more popular with others, it almost seems more left brain. It doesn't attract me. It doesn't pull me in. There's so much more of a deeper labyrinth to this. And I think a lot of people with their studies of the sun, they get really ego-driven to be number one in their field. That's very much a part of the dark side of our culture. So despite the fact there could even be people that are, very few people on the planet that are even have an interest in this stuff. Out of the few that do, even fewer are looking at the human behavioral response. Most people, in my observations, seem to, which is fine, mostly seem to be looking at the weather aspect of it. And that has a lot of application, though, in the real world, like business, like stocks, the value of agriculture. People with, really good knowledge about this stuff, in a way, could earn a lot of money from other people that, for their own reasons, are interested in this. And for some, it's not just, like a prepper thing, or a thing like what's printed with BP Earthwatch. For others, it's straight monetary, and it's playing the market. And so there is a reason why the weather crop, that element of it has more of a popularity than perhaps the philosophical, spiritual perspectives on the sun. I'm actually going to look for a way to kind of summarize this information. But as far as solar maximum, it could start as soon as 2019 or 2020. She does not believe that we are going into one of these Mondrian minimums. Extreme activity during smaller cycles. Why? She talks about 2017 having 2 large solar flares and one in 2012. Weak cycles does not mean that we are in the clear in regards to massive solar activity. She also showed a chart of the solar radiance for the last 1,000 years to make a point that a lot of people are just looking at the Mondrian minimum up to the Dalton and, quote, freak out and run with it. But with the solar variability being so large, looking at the cycle from a larger perspective, there's other perspectives one could have. And she says, quote, we just don't have the kind of data that we want. Amplitude modulation being a factor that works against some of the more popular views on the solar minimum predictions. She was asking if the forecast for the grand solar minimum relate to the new Mayan long count cycle and found the question interesting. She recognizes the connection between less solar activity and reduced temperatures, not higher, while staying out of the climate debate and staying in her specialty area of specialty, but does recognize there's a possible idea. People are debating this of global warming balancing out the global cooling from less solar activity, but declines to make an opinion on the matter. So she's basically recognizing that there is a debate going on with regards to that. She assumes the next solar cycle is going to be about the same. I think that we're going to see a larger solar cycle after the minimum that we're in, and that we're going to see a lot of geopolitical realities come to a head. But, of course, there could be some type of a reality of a much less active sun overall after 2030 and a greater and greater decline. But my main focus is that we're going to see a lot of life-transforming events and a lot of manufactured darkness in and around the year 2025. And maybe even between 2022 and 2000 and look at those numbers. And there's something about this period which has fascinated me personally for over 10 years. So what, am I be between 42 years old and 45 years old? Those seem like prime years to be involved in something big or to be at the peak of something. So in my own life, I feel like I'm ramping up to 2022 and where I'm going to be. Not only where I'm going to be on the planet, but what I'm going to be involved with. And also there's that need for us to create those affirmations that during those intense times in our nation's future, that we will be somewhere safe, that we will be doing something good, that we will be even centered and in a spiritual place, even if we may be to a certain degree forecasting global warfare at that time. There could be multiple realities at once, and to a certain degree we can create our own reality. That's part of what I'm doing here off the grid, creating media using solar panels, where I got to basically wait for the light, to come over the trees to rise. And by this time, even though it's October, it seems a little early to be waiting until 10:30. I gotta wait till 10:30 or 11 to even really flip on the lights and start a recording. That late in the day. So by being in nature, and I'll go back to her notes in a minute, I get to have the experience of being away from the unnatural electromagnetic pollution, all the cell phones, and the main form of life, other than a few LED bulbs, but the main form of life / light is the sun, not a light bulb, is the sun. And to be connected with that as the primary form of light over other forms of life, I'm also moving more into a full spectrum light direction for the lights that I have inside. The photography light that I'm using for video is also full spectrum. These are also lights that be used for growing things or your pet reptilian. But a lot of people are tapped out from this, and a lot of people don't really contemplate this. The sun is just something that, provides warmth. And, even for scientists, hey, look at the aurora borealis. Yay. And I'm going to go travel over here and see the sprites. But let's not hypothesize on the shapes of the sprites and why we see all these really strange, almost, UFO-like aurora borealis solar phenomena and things of that nature. I think there is something to that. I think there is something to some of these images of things going in and out of the sun. I may not get behind, a bandwagon number of people going, oh my God, they shut down the solar observatory. Let's all just flag ourselves as conspiracy people and talk about the same moment. It's like, I know when not to get behind a trend when it's a national trend, and to do let's wait and see if this is just a trap to get people to create a buzz around something. Kind of like the solar flare gate. Solar flare gate. You know what I'm saying? Solar flare observatory, New Mexico gate. And it's like, oh my God, man, this stuff never ends. And so that is something to keep in mind. If people want to go in a particular direction of hiding things and deception, there's a whole world out there to look at. But there are multiple solar observatories around the planet. Keep that in your mind as you see certain headlines cater to people's ignorance of that particular fact. There could be other reasons. But with regards to there being knowledge at the highest levels of our government as to how the sun behaves and how they can work the markets and how they can manipulate, and I think it goes even deeper than that. Oh yeah, man, we can have a whole round table one day. If more people get deep into this, like they can start on one level of looking at solar minimum and crops, or start on another level and then advance that knowledge where they start to see the other trends in the human behavior response. And before you know it, in 10, 15, 20 years, they could be full on scientific conferences, and they can use actual data. They can do tests up in Boulder where they can, use me or somebody else and test our actual hormonal level or our T levels, testosterone levels, and compare that on the days of geomagnetic storms or in and around it during periods of solar minimum. And I guarantee you, in my mind and guess, my best guess, that you would see a difference in the levels. Not just the brainwave levels, you can do tests on that level. But I believe with actual scientific measurements of the human body that certain functions you'll see more of and you'll see less of, based on where we are in the solar cycle. Yes, I believe this can be verified scientifically, but yet the greater interest in the sun's behavior is on other areas for now. So I think that I'm here, and others may be here as well, on the planet and in the research arena of the sun, whether they're doing it on an amateur level or they're a professional. There are many souls. Many people talk about the sun having soul essence. There are many souls here alive now that are speaking about the sun, and I don't think that it's an accident. I think that it's our calling. Other people, other forms of life that are here on earth may not feel that same spiritual connection to the sun. There may be a reason for that. Going back to this, she said, if you want to become a scientist, this is where she's like basically speaking in code, telegraphing that she knows more than what she's saying, but this is the reality. She says, if you want to become a scientist, you have to choose a specific area of research. Some people are able to branch out and cover all issues under the sun, including all types of solar-related phenomena. Now, she said a mouthful there. There's a lot of information that you can glean from that very wide overview statement. She recognizes what she doesn't know, but remains open to new information. Also, another new fact, what we have to keep in mind is that the sun is a magnet. At the northern portion would have one polarity, with the southern having the opposite. And so the actual divider looks like the yin-yang symbol, the magnetic neutral line. And when the sun's poles flip, they flip very fast, and people flip out during that period. I experienced it late 2013, early 2014. I experienced someone flipping out that was close to me at the time as I was going to Kansas City, Missouri, during the polar vortex from Alamosa, Colorado. That was late 2013. I have some videos about that. There's also the Tale of Four Angels. Interesting YouTube video you might want to check out. So I went through some crap when I was at some lower moments in my traveling. That's why it's important to hold your spirit up strong when you're traveling. A lot of these places like Greyhound and others have a lot of really low energy. I'm going to have to summarize this a little bit more. But there's balance from order to chaos, from solar minimum to solar maximum using satellite data measuring solar wind rates. So in a way, a lot of the stuff is balanced out, even if the charts show highs and lows on other levels. And it's interesting, it looks just like a sound wave. Like when you're looking at sound waves on Cool Edit or Adobe, or has a different name now. An active cycle of the sun has slower solar winds, as well as fast winds, and a minimum has faster winds. In a maximum period, the energy is going in all directions. In a minimum period, you have a faster solar wind that's coming out of the solar coronal holes, which you mentioned earlier, and it hits the planet with shock waves of focused single stream hits. And the description of this sounds like a knockout blow. Briefly, there's a spiral nature of how the sun kicks things out, and it's like a garden sprinkler. Her description. Paint the picture in the mind's eye. Garden sprinkler. It's called the Parker spiral. And it's that spiraling as the sun is moving and it's shooting at the earth. If it's hitting the earth or near the earth, it's going to be affecting it in different places in different ways. Eugene Parker created the Parker Solar Probe that created this theory, which included the solar wind, and his peers laughed at him. You're crazy, man. With a fast wind stream, the matter is being shot off faster. When it's shot off more slowly, the sun can rotate farther before the next one is released. Shock waves is when a fast stream catches up with a slow stream. So this is where it's like a punch. Just like a rock in water, and the water moves away and ripples and causes that wave and hits the standing water in front of it and compresses, causing the wave front. She also said same thing like if you're on a freeway, like the LA 405, picture someone coming in, slamming into cars, and compression. That's another example of this. Or as I said also, the knockout punch. This connects back to the aurora borealis projections worldwide. Aurora can be pulsating from this flux of storms. This is also when the energy in the radiation belts pumps up and anomalies start. Ghostbusters, who are you going to call? Cosmic ray penetration increases the importance. Got to worry about the unwanted penetration, including galactic, from the galactic cosmic ray rods. Nephilim jokes omitted. Just stop right there, Alex. Get back to the script. Cosmic ray penetration increases the importance, I was going to say impotence, the importance of understanding the solar cycles and where we are and being able to predict and understand their behavior. Keep your eye open for new sunspots and signs of a new polarity. She also mentioned something known as Maxwell's laws, and also says that magnetic fields and electric fields are siblings. So, for example, there were questions in her live chat about the electric universe, and she's saying that it's doing a disservice to only know about the electric universe, but not the magnetic. She confirms that we've seen sunspots indicative of a new solar cycle, although there's controversy. There is controversy over that view, right? So if you're not getting enough controversy from today's political mass mind control spectrum, then there is controversy that you can eat up as to whether or not we're in sunspot cycle 25. Right? Just pick your conflict. So taking a breather here, we are about to go to a new segment. Okay. We're going to talk about the human behavioral response from information that I put together. In this segment, this came from Burl Payne, although I added some information as well. And this is from something, and I'll leave the links down below. This was compiled 10 years ago. So basically on my 29th birthday, when I was living on Woodstock in Southeast Portland around 50th, not too far from Powell. Sat down over the course of days, brought together a lot of information from a lot of different sources. Solar cycles and human behavior. This is where we're concluding today's re-recording of exactly what I did yesterday with the technical difficulties hopefully omitted. Solar cycles and human behavior. Could cycles of war and peace be tied to cycles of the sun? Some researchers claim that geomagnetic storms affect brain waves and hormone levels, causing a number of different reactions, predominantly in males. While a few women may also experience changes during these storms, they generally seem less affected by the sun's behavior. Reacting to changing hormone levels, some men may become increasingly irritable and aggressive, while others may become more creative. And so that's a matter of perspective as opposed to a fact. Some of us have seen both genders very aggressive during solar maximums. So there could be more subtle differences, like blood types or their own astrology or something unique about their response to the sun or them at that moment. An increase in solar activity is found to increase psychotic episodes in individuals who already suffer from unstable psychological states. While we might relate such behavior to a full moon, in 1963, Dr. Robert Becker and his colleague, Dr. Howard Freeman, demonstrated that solar changes also lead to a noticeable increase in psychotic activity. Yet these reactions are not simply isolated to a few particularly sensitive or unlucky individuals. Evidence indicates that wars and international conflicts most often break out when sunspots are rapidly forming or rapidly decaying, as these are times in which there are more intense geomagnetic storms. So there was a lot of sunspots, of course, before World War II, and there was one giant one, by the way, in around the time of the Roswell incident, which I included in my presentation. In addition, this increase in solar activity correlates to periods of more accidents and illnesses, as well as an increase in crimes and murder. The entire biosphere is affected by this electromagnetic pollution. How many of you remember that I've made forecasts about the 2020s and radical groups rising up and almost being overtaken by a type of energy to take out the perceived enemy of tomorrow's age, or the one that's being ramped up for now? I see that in line, and my thoughts have been motivated by studies like this, learning the cycles and where we are now in the cycle and where we're going, and all the stuff that's brewing also with China and the 2020s. Is this stuff still seemingly totally crazy to you, or is there more of a connection, at least at this point in 2018, if it wasn't in 2017, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10? If you thought all this stuff was nuts, and just the only stuff was saying was just the solar minimum and the crop failures and all this stuff is stuff for the trash can, is that still your position? Even with all this knowledge and other people that have looked at this, just because it's not popular on YouTube and it's not supposedly a part of Agenda 21 and a conspiracy. But yet they use this knowledge against us. So it's not in our favor to overlook this. They put out deliberate propaganda during particular times to whip the frenzies up and move them into a particular direction. Of course, we moved on from me reading Tamitha's notes from the scientific community, and her opinion as a solar physicist. This is how I see this information being useful, by being able to see literally the solar writing on the wall or the light shining through the window, I suppose, in another example. Not all geomagnetic storms are disruptive, but over time, these extremes may affect periods of earthly conflict. The data on cycles of war and peace extend back 2,500 years. As early as 1915, some scientists were beginning to recognize connections between solar activity and human behavior. And that's where we get to the Russian scientist Alexander Chavinsky, who observed a correlation between mass changes in human behavior and sunspot cycles. In the 1930s, Professor Raymond Wheeler, a historian at the University of Kansas, took the observation one step further. His research afforded numerical rankings to the severity of individual battles correlating to solar cycles. His data was statistically analyzed by Edward Dewey, who validated the existence of these cycles. And so he himself wrote a book about the connection between agriculture and sunspot cycles. In the 1980s, with a more detailed analysis of Wheeler's data, the connection became more clear. Upon closer examination of the data, it appears that we're beginning to discover a pattern emerging where wars are most likely to start at key points of the sunspot cycle. This is where geomagnetic activity is changing most rapidly on the upsurge of the solar activity or on the downward part of the cycle. And now that we've, some time has passed, I'm going to speculate a little bit more openly about that, though. The brain is going through these major changes at that moment, as it's going up, as it's going down. If it's going to maintain for a while, the brain's going to stabilize. So the brain is being shook up. The magnetite in the brain, and it looks like I didn't mention that in this article, but they discovered magnetite in the human brain in 1992. There's a New York Times article that writes about it. Prior to that, they discovered it in pigeons, birds, fish, whales, migratory animals. So it's not just in those animals that move around the planet naturally. And even though if you have a strong opinion about whatever political, look at the nature of us being locked into our own particular continent, for those of us that are locked into the United States. I certainly made mistakes when I was younger. I consider myself locked into this continent. It feels very unnatural to not really even be able to travel or see different places or see Europe, things of that nature. Or to see other places, see the Middle East, to see Asia. I notice there's calls for other people to have their movement restricted. I'm just noticing how we kind of have a biological inclination to move. And that's why I notice more people moving in and out of certain American cities to where there's a trend to where rent will go up right away because of a popularity of an area and people are following the magnetic line influence. And that is my belief as to why certain places have grown really quickly during certain periods. Media can add to that. So the growth in Oregon, or the growth in Colorado. There are literally periods in which people are moving in particular directions, and in some cases from specific areas together in like a collective to other areas. Kind of like the exodus of California. Although a lot of people are also trying to get into California. Get in there, kind of feel those energies of Southern California, other areas, that artery of life on the West Coast. So I also believe there's a lot of reasons why, even if I'm not there, people prefer to be in proximity to San Francisco, in proximity to Portland, in proximity to Seattle, in proximity to San Diego or Los Angeles, even if they're not right in the middle of it, because they prefer that urban, not just the urban part, it's the magnetic field energy. There's more energy moving through those areas. Greg Braden, I don't follow all his work. For the most part, I don't, but he wrote something about 0 point. And we're not talking about specific types of technology. We're talking about like a latitude or a longitude or some area that runs around the planet, or a particular line that goes through the West Coast. And he speculated that it's because of that there's more change and action and things going on in those areas, as opposed to areas where you get further away from that region, that line. You get to the Midwest, get to kind of where I am, and you find areas of old America where they don't want any change at all, or new people, or people that don't seem like them, whether it be on one level or another. And so there is a reason why some areas in Middle America are really slow to change in comparison to the West Coast and other more highly populated areas. There are some reasons why certain areas are more highly populated, and it's the energy. But in today's day and age, I think there's a lot of risk with living in a dense population center. So there are ups and downs to that way of life. The ups, obviously, things are moving a little faster, so ideas like this, right, would be less fringe. If I was living in an urban area, maybe I'd be able to be around other like minds with people interested in things like this. When you get out to some of these really rural areas, you can find yourself with a lot of deep interests and find yourself the only one with some of those particular interests. The last paragraph that I'll read here, then we'll close. In other words, wars could be a kind of mass psychosis when we see the connection to physical mechanisms such as electromagnetic pollution. Now imagine your 5G hamburger on top of that. This gives us some predictive insight into when increased aggressions are likely to start. Calculations indicate that we're due to see another rise in intense solar activity in less than 2 years' time, around September 2010. Again, this was written in 2009, in February. And so here we are, 10 years later, and we're a few years away or less than the beginning of the next solar cycle. Yes, there will be life after this solar minimum. So that is where my focus is. I want to thank you for watching. I hope that there was some information that shed some light into what science recognizes with regards to the sun and what I have to say about it. If you'd like to make a donation via PayPal, there's links down below. Also have links to her work. Check out youtube.com/AlexAnswery. We'll have her channel posted in the other interesting channels area. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new. Also sign up to the newsletter. Till next time, I'm Alex Answer, reminding you that the path to the ultimate truth and place of power still lies within.